Welcome all Gothamites to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and beyond, Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. You and I need to talk a little bit about the weeks that have passed. Specifically, we need to talk a little bit about Comic-Con, which happened in July, but we haven't been able to really address how awesome it was to be able to do our panel. We did put the panel up. It was the last episode. But tell me a little bit about your thoughts of Comic-Con 2017.
I absolutely loved it, and I especially want to thank everybody who had a chance to come to our panel. Our panels are usually in the evening, around 7 or 8 o'clock at night on typically, would you say the Friday or Saturday of the show?
Saturday. Mm-hmm.
So, other things are going on. People have dinner, they have reservations, they have actual reservations at at restaurants. You like my joke?
Yeah, that was good.
But so many people came out to see us, to ask questions, to listen to Paul Dini, Brendan Fletcher, and Alan Burnett talk about the animated series, and to kindly answer questions about the psychology of the animated series. And so I thank our guests tremendously. I thank our audience who not only showed up, but dressed up, asked questions, stayed after, sent us notes. I really enjoyed it, and I just need to let everybody know who made it. You guys are why we do this, and I was in my element, and I could not have had a better time, and every single person there made a difference just by being there and listening to the stuff that we talk about. For those of you who were not able to be there in person, Brian, as you just said, we do have the show posted, and it's the one just before this one. So I encourage people to listen to it. A lot of new insight. And
is it just me, or does it seem like the panel didn't even get started before it was over?
It was so fast. We touched upon a lot of topics, especially around the writing of some of these really serious relationships and characters and their narratives, but also what it meant to us, especially both Brendan and myself as fans of the show. And I felt a little bit vulnerable because I was explaining not just to the audience, but to Paul what the show meant to me growing up and how it really shaped my career. And there are a few words to really describe that, but I managed to articulate some explanation of how his show and Batman in general launched and just kickstarted my energy into psychology and comics. And so I encourage people to listen to that and to continue to give us feedback about it. And for folks who were there and didn't get a chance to ask their question, please send us an email. We're on Twitter. Our email is arkhamsessions@gmail.com, and we welcome more of your comments and questions.
Absolutely. Drea, you and I got an email. Well, you got an email.
Speaking of email.
But I'm mentioned in it at our arkhamsessions@gmail.com account. A gentleman by the name of Gabe says that basically, he starts out by talking about the podcast and how much he loves the podcast and how much he loves Batman and watching the animated series, and that this gives him a good opportunity to rewatch and see it in a different way. But the paragraph that you and I both latched on to, which is much nicer than it sounds, but it is funny. I would regularly put on Batman the Animated Series, as well as other stuff from around the same time, to help me sleep. I prefer to fall asleep to something like that and have I've regularly had trouble sleeping most of my life. I wouldn't call it insomnia. I'd relate more towards stress sometimes. I've moved on to your podcast as a new sleeping aid. Works as good as alcohol, but without the rough morning. I think I find your voices very comforting, and I don't have to use my eyes to semi-watch a TV. I also listen to your podcast while I cook and on the road. As a traveling musician, I play the bass.
Nice. At first I ribbed this guy and even said at Twitter sent a Twitter
tweet
about the idea of somebody using our podcast as a sleeping aid, but there's more context there.
But you
of course.
You did it jovially, not actually upset
honestly.
over
And
it.
if folks feel soothed and comforted by our voices, I am totally okay with that. I think that we're here for you guys. Sometimes we're educational, sometimes we're funny, sometimes we're a sleeping aid. I'm okay with that.
So let's start talking about Roxy Rocket.
Tonight's episode is all about...
Now we're actually getting into the types of voices you might hear
I know.
while talking about Roxy Rocket and this episode.
So this is a good timing for my disclaimer.
Let's give your disclaimer.
I've not given a disclaimer yet on the show. I don't know if this has come up on the show, but I know in person I've given parents some recommendations. Our show, Brian, what do you think? 14 and up, 14 and older is probably the age cutoff or the recommendation for who our audience could be. I would say
if you're a really smart 11-year-old,
sure,
that would be fine too.
And that is something
we are clean on iTunes.
We are clean. Oh, you mean that's our rating?
The rating, we are clean on iTunes.
Right. We tend to not use foul language. That's not really our thing.
It's true.
But as far as the content, the level of sophistication, the types of topics, the seriousness of it, we talk about...
Be a little more adult.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I encourage parents to make that decision just like you would. There's a television show and it's 14 plus. You make the decision. You have a pretty smart, independent 12-year-old who can make decisions and understand some of this content and even have dialogue with you afterwards. Why not? But our recommendation, if we had one, I would say is 14 plus. This show in particular, I felt required a little bit of a disclaimer because we're going to be talking about sexual behavior and sex more directly. Mm-hmm. We've definitely covered sex as innuendo or euphemism. And we've certainly talked about Batman and his relationships, intimacy, the Joker and Harley. So this isn't a new thing. But I think that because of this particular character and the way she's portrayed, we really are going to get into some more description of her motivation and her drive. And I think that we're going to become a little bit more specific around her sort of like sexual motivations.
This is going to become some people's favorite episode ever.
Or people are just going to fall asleep to it. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So great. So strap on your utility belts and put it on, put it in. Let's go.
You were disclaimed. Let's talk about Roxy Rocket. Drea, what did you know about Roxy Rocket going into this episode?
Well, I'd seen it before, but returning to this episode, I already knew Roxy was a firecracker, a character who I remembered Batman couldn't quite catch, couldn't quite control. And I recall that they had a heated relationship.
Yeah.
And rewatching this episode, I was really reminded of the
just how heated a relationship
various
was.
elements. I did not recall just how overt some of the sexual stuff was. So that would certainly, I made a few notes to myself that we certainly need to address those aspects of her character.
So let's talk about Roxanne Sutton. She was a character that was created in 1994 for the comic book series that was a companion to Batman the Animated Series. And apparently Bruce and Paul liked her so much that when they revisited the series for the new Batman Adventures, they decided to write her into this episode, which is The Ultimate Thrill. We can talk about The Ultimate Thrill, but I don't think we necessarily have to go through scene by scene because this is a pretty straightforward episode. We find out she was a stunt person for several women and men in Hollywood because she was just that tough, they say. And let's let Batman tell the story of Roxy Rocket.
She seems quite fearless.
That was the problem. She began making stunts more dangerous than they needed to be. The danger of the work had become more important than the work itself. Finally, no company would insure her. She lost everything.
Well, that was a fair exposition.
It was fair. And pretty to the point. She doesn't really make an effort to hide her identity. She is in a kind of a leather bomber jacket. She's got her goggles. She rides a sort of a jet-powered rocket that's steerable, at least. But she is definitely an enthusiast for thrilling adventures,
right?
Like you would expect a stunt person to be.
And she's likable. It's not as if we see her as reckless and destructive yet. At this point, we feel that she exercises freedom, that she's a feminist, that she's, she makes her own rules and she breaks the standard protocol. And so we kind of, when we're introduced to her, we kind of like her. We feel like she breaks the mold, and that as a woman, I find her to be really inspiring. As
was mentioned in Batman's explanation of her backstory, the stunts for which she was hired to coordinate and create were excessively too dangerous. And eventually she was blackballed from Hollywood. She was no longer allowed to do stunt work, so she had to turn to a life of crime, like you do.
It's Gotham City.
Well, if you really want to have that level of thrill, Gotham City is where you go, especially if you have turned to a life of crime. Dre, I want to talk about that just right off the bat, because, we see that she is stealing jewels. She's selling them off to the Penguin, who I want to bring up in a minute because he says something that I find to be pretty interesting. But let's talk about Roxy and her obsession with thrills. Certainly you and I have talked about risk seeking, risk taking behavior.
So we've talked about risk taking as a personality trait. I think more officially in the field of psychology, it's sensation seeking. It's a personality trait. It's not your whole dimension. It's not everything you're defined by, but it's one particular element of your personality. Some of us are higher on the spectrum of sensation seeking. I have disclosed that I'm not high on sensation seeking.
Nothing has changed?
Nothing has changed. I am particularly...
Would you say you're not making progress then?
Not necessarily, because actually that's a really good point, or a really good question to raise. Being on the... wherever you are on the sensation seeking spectrum, that doesn't necessarily... reveal or dictate your level of functioning. It's a trait.
Okay.
So think about like extroversion, introversion. That's another spectrum, right?
Sure.
So we're all kind of on different points. I will say though that sensation seeking, if you're particularly high on this trait, meaning that you are a sensation seeker and you pursue thrilling experiences. I think I have more official definition as a personality trait. It's the pursuit of novel and intense experiences without regard for physical, social, legal, or financial risk. And so clearly Roxy fits this particular...
She doesn't really care what it costs. She's out for the adventure.
Right. It is the experience itself, not the consequences, not, there's disregard for what will happen to her.
I wouldn't even say that she cares that what she's doing is illegal so much as it is helping pay for her ability to do more risky things.
Right.
Fencing the diamonds to Penguin is paying for her ability to steal diamonds and be chased by Batman.
Well, and being chased by Batman is unlike no other. That's probably the ultimate thrill.
I don't know that that's true. It very well may be the ending. We can talk about that.
We'll get to the climax later.
Oh, right.
I don't want to rush to the climax just yet.
Okay.
I know you do, but
yep.
Hold on just a second. So I think that one thing we need to consider, just like any behavior, is it excessive and is it destructive? So if we'd say that, yes, Roxy's behavior in particular, her sensation-seeking behavior, that is the manifestation of her trait, right? Because I've sort of interchanged them. I just want to remind folks, personality trait is a dimension of your personality. The behavior that manifests is a result of that. So again, if you're introverted, you isolate, you don't socialize, etc. So for sensation seekers, they are pursuing adventure.
Right.
They are in most cases skydiving, bungee jumping, spending time at theme parks. There is a point though where it becomes destructive. And when it becomes destructive and maybe even harmful to a person or to others, we want to consider, is this problematic? Is this potentially a symptom of a mental health disorder? Is this something that needs to be, you need intervention or some kind of response so that this person stays safe and doesn't harm others? So we need to consider those aspects when we analyze or evaluate Roxy's behavior.
What sort of disorders, because you mentioned, is this a symptom of disorders? You've mentioned in the past that bipolar disorder is someone, could be someone who goes seeking sensations, goes actively going for the risks. Are there any other sort of disorders that you as a psychologist would look to examine to see if maybe Roxy fits into that with her thrill-seeking behavior?
I would say that there are a number of different disorders that come to mind. Of course, bipolar disorder is one. During manic episodes, sometimes folks have the tendency to behave in excessive ways, be reckless, destructive. Excessive sexual indiscriminate behavior is one of those examples where somebody is not really selecting partners at all, sort of like random sexual interactions that, again, meet that pattern of a person not considering the consequences of that behavior. But there are the other types of psychological profiles, somebody who suffers from psychosis, somebody who is or has a substance use disorder, somebody who has a diagnosis of borderline narcissistic or antisocial personality disorder, which, Brian, you know very well.
I do know it very well because we talk about Batman every single week. And we'll talk about the ending of this episode, too.
Yes, we will. So in many ways, it's hard with this particular character because in some ways I see her thrill-seeking behavior having this sexual element to it. And there is, I would say, a more overt or direct manifestation of reckless sex or indiscriminate sexual behavior. And, that can be a common symptom of a manic episode, which occurs with bipolar disorder. So that is something I thought about when we were watching the show. And yet, on the other hand, I wasn't necessarily sure that each of her thrill-seeking behaviors or antics were specific to having a sexual response. That just could be one of many different experiences she has.
She seems to be addicted to the adrenaline more than anything else. There's a great moment. Batman believes that she is looking for revenge because she is unable to do her stunt work anymore. But Batgirl has an interesting hypothesis, let's take a listen.
I guess she's exacting some kind of revenge.
Or she's still after the thrill, and now that she's had a taste of you, she's not gonna settle for anything less.
So, Drea, that sounds to me like kind of an addiction and sort of a threshold that she now has to reach in order to be satisfied. So it's got to constantly be Batman from this point forward.
Yeah. So adrenaline addiction is actually a real phenomenon. It's not necessarily a disorder in the same sense that we're talking about some of these other conditions, but this addiction is specific to the chemical in our bodies that actually a couple of chemicals that are released during really kind of like exciting moments.
Yeah.
And so not everyone is prone to adrenaline addiction. There are only some folks who are sort of neurobiologically primed for this. And The addiction is really simple. A person creates stress in their bodies in order to get a rush.
Okay.
Now, if you're like me, again, let's think about this as a spectrum. If you're like me, I don't want that feeling. I interpret the rush, the physical rush, as anxiety, as fear, as phobias, as uncomfortable experiences.
But you are often anxious, so maybe you
Right.
do actually have an addiction to it, just an uncomfortable addiction
Wish
to
it would go away. So I am aversive, like I would have an aversive reaction. However, there are some people that seek the adrenaline, and there are reasons why biologically. So for some people know that adrenaline is also the chemical or the neurotransmitter is known as epinephrine. And when we experience epinephrine, it's that fight or flight experience. So, your heart races and you feel the sensation in your body and you're really kind of edgy. And again, some people experience that as excitement, energy,
Can you explain why? Is there something? I realize that you're not a neurologist,
Right.
But can you explain why some people feel the exact same chemical and run towards
Yeah.
something versus run away from it?
Well, I have two explanations. One is a sort of a biological explanation, and one is a psychological interpretation of the experience. I'm so glad you asked me because I get to talk about a study from 1962.
Oh, the golden age of psychology.
Right.
They don't make studies like that anymore.
Such a great era that brought us so many answers via the mechanisms of so many unethical practices and methods. But first, I want to talk about the biological aspect of it. I mentioned epinephrine. That's the neurotransmitter that kind of elicits that feeling of fight or flight, right? So you have all of the energy, your extremities are prepared to essentially flee from something dangerous or life-threatening, or to put up your guns and start fighting. So physiologically, that's the experience. What happens, though, is that there's also a release of feel-good neurotransmitters and chemicals. One is dopamine.
Okay.
And so dopamine, many people have heard of. It's kind of the chemical that is associated with feeling good, feeling just kind of like not necessarily relaxed. It's kind of a combination of relaxation and feeling satisfaction, pleasure. So the interesting thing about our bodies is that in response to the epinephrine, our bodies release kind of like counter that with dopamine and norepinephrine and neurochemicals that make us feel good. And so that's, I believe, in some instances what folks are after. They may not have the cognition about this, but physiologically what they're experiencing is that counteractive feel good biological feeling right after that excitement, or in some cases so close to the excitement that it's a mixture of those experiences. So that's one thing to think about. And all our bodies are very different. So in some individuals, those bursts of neurochemicals may be very prominent and very intense. I don't think I'm one of those people because I don't really feel. Think about it when you're on a roller. Like we went to Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah.
I forgot the name of the ride, but it's the Guardians of the Galaxy ride.
The Breakout.
Yeah. So imagine, or you recall the feeling of, the kind of the like excitement of being on that ride, and the immediate feeling afterwards, and even during moments of that ride, are like these really pleasurable sensations. This is why we go on roller coasters, because our bodies go through all these really novel sensations.
Now, you liked that ride more than you thought you even would.
And immediately after that ride, I had a rush of like pleasure and satisfaction. And I think it was because this dopamine was rushing through my body and my brain. So that's one thing to think about is the complexity of the neurochemicals and the experience of that. And there's also, of course, our body's at rest or after some time following that adventure, we lack those experiences. We lack the chemical response. And so for some people, they might be at baseline or at rest and feel the urge to get that experience back. And so, Brian, the only way for me to get that particular feeling back is to go on that ride again.
Right.
That's maybe what I could tell myself. I know better. There are maybe other ways, but that's kind of where the addiction comes from. Okay, now I'm in.
So now she's
withdrawal.
she's feeling like the only way that she can get that is to have another adventure with Batman chasing her.
Exactly. She needs to sort of have repeated experiences with him. She's pursuing interactions with him so she could have that feeling. And I truly believe that nothing will match that. That is the only thing that will give her those sensations. The other thing about epinephrine I need to mention is that when we have intense rushes of epinephrine, that gives us the repeated feeling of reduced pain and increased joy. So now you played sports.
I did.
So were you ever like in a game?
Yes.
Okay, hold on. Were you in a game and you got hurt, but you didn't feel how painful that injury was until after the game was over?
Oh, sure.
Right. So what injury can you share? Like what particular injury it was? And
I mean, I had several injuries over the course of my football career, but the one that ultimately ended it was I had herniated discs in my back, and I got hit in the back after I caught an interception. And I mean, I felt the pain then,
right?
But I was young. I was 19, and I continued to play through pain, excruciating, like cry myself to sleep at night pain for like 5 weeks.
Yeah.
But
well, that particular injury is known to be very painful.
Yes.
And yet you managed immediately after the injury to keep playing during the game.
Yeah.
So that illustrates kind of what it's like when the body releases these chemicals, and there's almost like this pain padding that happens where we're not really able to experience the intensity of the pain until we're out of danger or we're out of the situation. And clearly this is really a mechanism in our bodies to keep us safe, right? So if we're injured in some way, we still have to escape. That's really how we manage to do that. So it's pretty normal to experience reduced pain and even a sensation of joy during kind of like thrilling experiences. Now, what's interesting is that, again, once you realize that, and think about it, if you are in some level of pain, you may seek situations that will dull that pain or at least distract you from some of the pain. And I think clearly I'm talking about physiological pain, but we could also extend that to psychological pain if we think about the mind-body connection. So that's kind of all related to the physiological nature. I also want to talk about this study that was pretty important to the understanding of emotion and our interpretation of emotion, in particular, some of the feelings of arousal that Roxy experiences during her thrilling times, during her adventures. And it's called the Shaky Bridge study. Have you heard of this?
The Shaky Bridge?
The Shaky Bridge.
I've not heard of the Shaky Bridge.
Well, I first need to mention that in the early 60s, which is your favorite time for psychology, well-known researchers Schachter and Singer were the first to posit that emotional expressions, that the experience of emotion has a two-factor theoretical basis to it. And I'm going to simplify it here. I'm not going to go into too much detail because, after that, 60 years of research has really led us to many, many more discoveries. But at the time, and this still holds true to some degree, there are two components to our emotional state. One is that we feel aroused, we feel some kind of physiological sensation. And then the second is that cognitive label of that feeling. So for an example, if you are in front of a bear and you feel, well, you experience rapid heartbeat and you can't breathe and you tense up, you would say that emotion is what?
Fear.
Right. If you are about to take a final exam, it's like the end of the semester.
Wait, is the bear attacking me? Because that's a very easy answer to a complicated question.
Yeah, you're right. It's fear. It's a normal person in front of a large bear.
So I'm at Grandfather Mountain in Boone, North Carolina.
I know. Yeah. Just think of this as more textbook.
Okay.
End of the semester, final exam, same feeling or same physiological sensation, rapid heartbeat, sweating, pupils dilating. Mm-hmm. What's the emotion? Of course.
Anxiety.
For most people.
That's the word I'm looking for.
For most people, anxiety. And then same thing, maybe your heart kind of flittering and fluttering. What
is the scenario?
I'm giving. So this is important because there's two factors. One is the arousal, which isn't that different.
Yeah.
And then the other is the context. It's how you label it and interpret it. And let's say you're in front of somebody that you find very attractive. Mm-hmm. So what is that emotion?
I like to call it the Roxy.
Okay, but love or attraction, intimacy, attraction, right?
Yeah.
So that's the basis of the two-factor theory, that you basically have the arousal component and then the cognitive appraisal, like how I'm labeling this. And so the studies to prove this was incredibly interesting, and this is where the Shaky Bridge comes into play. So 10 years later, 12 years later, Dutton and Aaron decide to take the theory and really make it more, I guess, illustrative or practical, and decide to do this Shaky Bridge study. And I really encourage people to look up Shaky Bridge experiment because it's really interesting. The premise or the protocol is basically they take all male participants who elect into this study, and they have them walk down either a, kind of rickety, shaky bridge. I imagine like an Indiana Jones type bridge. And the other participants, again, only male participants, walk down terra firma, a very solid walkway. At the end of their journey, it's only a few minutes, is a very attractive woman. And this is how it's described in the study, a very attractive woman who provides them with a questionnaire. It's a thematic apperception test, I believe. That's not important, but she provides them with like some questions, and then she gives them her phone number and says, if you have any additional questions for me, give me a call. Wink, wink. That's basically the study. Their hypothesis was that the arousal that they experienced, especially on the Shaky Bridge, would influence their likelihood of calling this woman. And so indeed, the results of the study showed that the male participants who were on the Shaky Bridge were more likely to follow up with this young, attractive participant. Does that make sense? You show a face of confusion.
Well, I find myself wondering if it would also be the difference between someone who found the Shaky Bridge exciting versus terrifying. Because if they found it terrifying, they might then associate the latter experience with fear and therefore not call her. But someone who was excited by the Shaky Bridge would be like, oh, I'm going to continue this ride and I'm going to call you.
So you're excellent. So you're picking up on some additional factors that probably influence the results. Now, at the time, the experimenters were confident that the results were basically demonstrating or confirming that their, these male participants' arousal, their heightened experiences after surviving the Shaky Bridge, were then kind of interpreted as attraction toward this woman, or their attribution of their arousal was not due to the bridge. It was due to, oh, I must really like this woman. I'm going to give her a call. There are some obvious problems. One you mentioned, we don't really know how they interpreted their arousal. Some may have been excited, some may have been scared, some may be high on sensation seeking and like didn't really, experience that much thrill from it. The other thing too is that it was a heteronormative study. So some of those male participants may not be attracted to women. And so
that particular woman.
So she was considered kind of like a socially, she represented the social construct of attractiveness. So who knows? Everyone has preferences, and who knows if they actually were attracted to her. So like many studies from that era, there were some issues, but the bottom line is that it helped to illustrate that the experience of emotion is determined by not just the intensity of the arousal, but also the cognitive appraisal that the situation we're in can really determine what exact emotion someone experiences. And I want to expand that, or kind of like think about Roxy in that scenario, especially during the end of this episode, that her heightened, or now you should probably explain
the end of the episode.
Yeah, like what she does.
So she rigs her rocket, which they're both riding.
What are you doing?
Testing your true metal, Batman. Jump now and you'll land in the water.
And if I don't?
You'll either crash into the canyon wall or hit the ground ahead.
So will you.
Now you understand the game.
Well, and if he jumps, he survives ostensibly, but she will escape.
Yes.
Like she gets away.
Yes.
And the scenario is that they're facing each other, straddling this rocket.
Right.
And he is serious and determined.
Right.
And sort of like, I'm looking for the right word. It's like this is life threatening. He is absolutely needing to get out of this situation.
Well, it's playing chicken, because ultimately she decides she's going to stay on there for as long as possible.
Yeah.
If he doesn't get off the rocket, she's not going to either. And then at one point she begins to get a little nervous. So she is going to stray. She is going to reset the controls so that she has control of the rocket.
Right.
She is basically, it's as if he has called her bluff.
So, and to clarify this, her intention is not to suicide.
Correct. Now,
which I think is important to point out.
Although, because this is a bit more problematic, Batman doesn't let her rig the controls. So he insists that they go toward the wall. And she is nervous about that until she realizes that the two of them are going to die together. And that suddenly escalates her level of excitement to what I will call an orgasmic state. I prove it with this bit of dialogue.
Oh, baby, you're the best. The ultimate thrill, the final stunt. Me and you. Yeah.
10 seconds earlier, she had decided she had enough. Batman actually escalated it further to the point that maybe he shouldn't have. Maybe it's a bit dangerous to have gotten to this point, because he's on the rocket. He can still capture her. One of the questions that I have is not just about Roxy, but is about Batman at this point, because the second time that he interacts with her, it's because she has stolen a painting from Wayne, from Bruce Wayne. It's an original painting that's worth $1 bazillion. And she then launches some fireworks up in the sky that basically make the bat symbol. She's calling on Batman. He shows up wearing like his little jet pack, whatever. Like this is a kid. he is doing it too. Like we've never seen him.
We need to remember that he's also a sensation seeker. Maybe not to this degree,
right?
But to some degree, he is also trying to avoid intense emotions.
Yeah.
By engaging in exciting, thrilling adventures.
The difference between the two of them is that when he says that they're going to both collide into the wall, he knows that they won't, because ultimately he is letting it play out to such a degree, right up until the moment that he shuts it down. They jump off. He, pulls the parachute.
Yeah.
And the two of them coast down to the ground. She thinks it's so that they can play again another day, but then he, puts her in handcuffs and takes her off to jail. And you brought up the point that she was not suiciding until she was. She had been driven to the point of, I'm okay with this.
I think when she's in the moment of... Was she falling at that time?
No, they were
she was still on the rocket.
They were still on the rocket.
Yeah. I think on Batman's side, he always knew he had that parachute. Like, he always knew he could get out of it.
Yeah, but this isn't about him. This is about her.
That's what I'm sort of explaining, that he always knows he has this out, that it's the parachute. When he falls, he knows he will survive. I agree with you that she does not know that she will survive, and that is thrilling to her. That is exciting to her. And that's probably the one element similar to the tendency that the Joker has. I mean, in very early episodes, we talked about the Joker being so fixated on sensation that he's even willing to be hurt, injured, maybe even die as a result of the things he gets into. And I think this is a moment where she gets overwhelmed with the sensation, the pleasure, the excitement. And I'm not taking the fault away from her, but I do think there is this neurochemical, physiological experience she has. I mean, we hear it clearly. There's a lot going on with her, but that is illustrating that she's gotten away from all sort of like gotten away from her inability to make a decision, to really understand the consequences, the reality of this. She's swept away.
Yeah, but if she has now reached a new threshold that she may have to reach again the next time in order to fulfill that need for adrenaline,
right?
Batman pushed her to that level. It's basically a level she can't reach again until she has put herself into to a point where death is imminent.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that was a good idea on his part.
I am not going to ignore the possibility that Batman also was seeking some kind of thrill during this experience, that he was really benefiting from this as well.
Well, it's not his thrill. It's the level he's pushing her to.
But I'm saying that is thrilling for him. Pushing her is what he, like, that's his thing. But remember what we talked about. There's disregard for any kind of, like, the social consequences, the actual risk you're taking. I think he also gets swept away. I think he's totally susceptible to getting swept away, overwhelmed with his own sensations and his own pathology. I'm totally willing to admit that there's some pathological stuff happening with Batman in this moment, and we see it unfold.
Yeah.
Most of us would not have driven her to this point.
Yeah. Could we talk just a minute about an interaction that she had with the Penguin? Because there is a moment where, for starters, Penguin is getting really upset that she is taking such elaborate risks and that she is getting Batman involved intentionally. He even decides at one point to kill Roxy because she is going to mess up his universe. The reason that he is so keen to keep this under wraps is that he says, well, and let's just play the quote here.
This isn't a movie, you know. I'm a legitimate businessman now. I don't want to draw attention to myself. I can't afford to have my associates getting Batman all excited.
Does Penguin actually believe that he's a legitimate businessman at this point? I mean, he's buying fenced diamonds off of Roxy. He is basically employing her to go get these different things. It seems like there is a period of time where he wants to be a legitimate businessman. He wants to have that front, that face. But there's a part of him that is equally addicted to crime or the need to be doing something, underhandedly.
Yeah.
Do you think he's in denial and legitimately believes he is a businessman? Or do you think, because why say this to Roxy if he knows that it's not true?
I see him as a bit of an elitist. And so there's something he's trying to make clear in terms of their differences, that he doesn't sink as low as she does. Now, you and I don't understand that crime's crime. It's how different are their behaviors, really. But he seems to, I think you're right. I think he seems to draw the line and see himself as not like her. I think he thinks she's trashy. I think he thinks she's beneath him. And maybe it's that she is, I mean, this could possibly take us back to one of my initial thoughts about her, which is that she's a feminist. And I think that he is uncomfortable with that. I think that he sees her as maybe showing off her freedom too much, or being too transparent, being too self-indulgent, and feeling good. That whole idea of Roxy is that she feels good and she doesn't care that you know it. Like she's unapologetic about that. He doesn't like that. And sometimes men don't like this about women. And I think, am I reading too much into it? Maybe. Yeah. But I think this is possibly a way to interpret it.
Sure.
That some men don't like it when women are seek pleasure and admit to it and are totally fine with it.
Sure. He also doesn't like that she's going to ultimately lead Batman to him.
Yeah. I mean, she's drawing attention to their operations, and I think that makes him uncomfortable.
Right. So then I have a question as a clinical psychologist. How does someone who has this problem deal with it? If that makes sense.
Well, I think first you should know where you fall. I've been pretty clear that I've examined this. I know. I've done some self-examination, and I know where I fall.
We're talking about the thrill-seeking specifically, not the... Okay. All
yeah.
Right.
I think you have a good sense. But I have some questions here that I can offer up to folks if they're curious. Maybe they don't fully understand, or maybe they haven't yet identified themselves on the dimension of sensation seeking. So I just pulled a few questions. This is actually from a website by Dr. Elaine Aron. By the way, there are multiple questionnaires and surveys and sensation seeking or thrill seeking resources that are available. I just pulled one that I thought was appropriate. So these are yes or no questions, Brian. I'm going to have you do these with me. So we're going to do this together.
Okay.
First one, if it were safe, I would like to take a drug that would cause me to have strange new experiences. Now that would be a firm no for me. No, I would never do this.
I'm too analytical. I want to know what the strange new experiences are, and I want to know, what does the word safe mean?
I think safe means like it's not going to hurt you. This means it's
probably a no for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I still want to know more.
Next one. I can become almost painfully bored in some conversations.
Yes.
I think that's a yes for you. Next one. I would rather go to a new place.
Wait, what is it for you?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Next one. And folks who are listening, you can also answer to yourselves yes or no after I read each item. Next item. I would rather go to a new place I may not like than go back again to a place I know I like.
No.
I'm definitely not going to a new place that I don't know that I like or not. So that's a no.
I do like new places.
You're just not sure if you'll have a good time. It's a shot in the dark.
Oh. Yeah, I'd probably go. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the way that it's worded, where it's like, would I rather? Like, am I willing to go to a new place? Yes, absolutely. If it's between that or like this other place that I know I really like, then maybe I would choose the place that I really like.
Okay.
I don't know how to answer that.
Next one. These get a little easier. I would like to try a sport that creates a physical thrill, like skiing, rock climbing, or surfing.
Yes. You?
Heck no. I'm not doing any of that.
Huh?
Next one. I get restless if I stay home for long.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a yes for you. Next one. My answer to that is there's Grubhub. Next one. And Amazon.com. Next one. I don't like waiting with nothing to do.
Yes.
I would say that's a yes for me. Next one. I rarely watch a movie more than once.
No.
That's unfair because this is like that's like your passion. Movies are your passion. So, next item. I enjoy the unfamiliar.
Yes.
That's a no for me. Next item. If I see something unusual, I will go out of my way to check it out.
It's too vague a question. Maybe.
Next item. I get bored spending time with the same people every day.
It depends on the people, but no.
Next one. My friends say it is hard to predict what I will want to do.
No.
Next one. I'm drawn to art that gives me an intense experience.
You're attracted to art that gives you
An intense experience.
yeah.
Next one. I like substances that make me feel high.
Drugs. We call those drugs.
Look, a psychologist wrote this. So,
We call those narcotics.
I'm going to say no.
Nah.
Okay. Next one. I prefer friends who are unpredictable.
Nah.
Next one. I would like to be an explorer.
Yes.
Next one. I enjoy it when someone makes an unexpected sexual joke or comment that starts everyone laughing a little nervously. That's an actual item on this assessment.
Is this a questionnaire that was written in the 60s as well? Because that would be very inappropriate today, and I'm not allowed to say yes.
Well, okay. So no comment to that one?
Correct.
Okay. Again, there are other types of sensation-seeking tests and surveys, some that go into much more detail about your hobbies and things like that, bungee jumping, skydiving, etc. How do you think Batman would do on that?
I don't know. I think Batman is the type of person who loathes all of those sensations but needs them. Like I don't think Batman gets onto his little jetpack because it's exciting for him. I think he just feels the need, like I need to go chase somebody.
Yeah.
I need to go punch somebody. Like I think that's like I don't think he seeks the thrill.
I think he's doing some self-destructive coping.
Yeah,
like I think that he goes into it, like you said, somewhat unwillingly, but there is this almost destructive, self-harming, avoidant nature of it. It's almost like, well, it's uncomfortable, but it's better than really addressing my trauma. So
There's
I'm going to
gotta
do
be,
it.
yeah, there's gotta be, think about it this way. How many times have we seen Batman use his grapple gun when he's falling off of a 20-story building or any number of...
What else would he do?
We've just learned that he's got a parachute.
Oh. I think he packed his parachute. He took his protection for this lady for sure.
No, but that's my point. Why wouldn't he take his protection for every situation if he knows this is a guy who chooses to go swinging around Gotham City with a grapple gun? rather than
Like walking on the streets?
rather than using his jetpack,
Yeah.
or rather than using a parachute when he's falling. That's a guy who goes for some thrill seeking.
So what could he do that's less self-destructive? I have
Yeah.
a few recommendations, and this is specifically for folks who maybe answered yes to many of those items or thought to themselves, wow, I get myself into destructive situations, or I tend to seek experiences that are, maybe a little bit too threatening because I'm looking for that high. Interestingly, I guess this shouldn't be surprising that some of these recommendations are not as exciting,
Well, yeah.
but are supposed to be adaptive and psychologically healthy. But for folks with adrenaline addictions in particular, the best way to overcome that condition is to exercise in a controlled, predictable, healthy way. So that means running, that means CrossFit, that means yoga, that means some kind of physical exertion, some kind of physical activity. That's the best recommendation. The other recommendation is to do things like meditation, deep breathing, some sort of mind-body experience that allows someone a calming exercise so they can get a little bit more control of their emotions and identify what it is that they're experiencing rather than get that rush to avoid those intense emotions. Cutting out stimulants is really important. So this would mean, of course, drugs, coffee, the things that will spike that high feeling, because of course you're going to have that crash, and that crash and that withdrawal is what causes the urge to seek those sensation-filled experiences. And then of course, some of the obvious ones like getting better sleep, getting more sleep, eating healthy foods, low-fat foods, low-salty foods, fruits, vegetables, all that boring stuff.
So these are all things to lower your need or whatever. They're not safe alternatives.
Why aren't those safe alternatives?
Well, because it's not an alternative to
to
the dopamine and the
running.
the epinephrine.
There's runner's high, but I would even add to that, like, people do go skydiving, people do go hiking, and those recreational activities are certainly recommended. I didn't mean to leave those out if that's what you were going for.
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking for exciting ways, there are exciting ways.
I mean, physically exciting, yes.
Yeah.
And I would even add one, which is to seek therapy and do a little bit of self-discovery, self-examination, identify what it is that maybe contributes to the urge to be in high or risky situations. High-risk situations is what I'm trying to say. And that might be helpful.
Drea, ultimately, what did you think of this episode?
I liked it. I mean, maybe not as much as Roxy liked her rocket ride, but I think it's edgy. I think, like many of these episodes, I think it's edgy. I think it pushes boundaries. I also think it introduces another female character with different elements, different personality dimensions, different motivations. This is not Harley Quinn.
Yeah.
This is not Catwoman. She has a different quality to her. She's, again, in that gray area, not necessarily evil, not necessarily good. She's, there's something forgiving about her. And again, just like I said earlier, there's something kind of inspiring and enlightening about her.
I don't know if I would call it inspiring, but...
Well, and toward the end, there's a lesson here, right? As far as like, we could get into trouble. And maybe this is a moral lesson. Maybe this is like, if you aren't careful, ladies, you could get into trouble. You know what I mean?
No. Why did you throw the gender on there?
Because...
I don't think it's specific to females that she, could get into trouble. I think if a male decided to ride a rocket directly toward a cliff face, he could get into trouble as well.
I agree. But again, another interpretation is if you're out of control as a woman, if you're out of control, if you're a sensation seeker, if you, you seek pleasure, it could get you arrested.
I guess, yeah, that could be.
I think that's just another interpretation of it. I don't think that's the intent.
Yeah.
Again, I think the majority of this episode is positive and is, female positive. But that's just another way to look at it.
Yeah.
I do have...
Did other people see that as well? Like, I want to know from our listeners, tweet us, email us, let us know if you see the same thing. Okay, so next week we've got another episode that is a little over the edge. In fact, it's titled Over the Edge, and it's another live episode that we did with our friend Livio Ramondelli at another comic book convention. We're excited about finally being able to play that for our listeners. Gabe, who sent us the email earlier, also asked us at the end of his email if there was ever a possibility of us doing a future episode of Superman animated series Nighttime, which, of course, is the only other time we see Roxy Rocket in the animated universe. We don't know. It's certainly a possibility. We've heard a lot of amazing things about this particular episode because of things we won't talk about until we get there.
Yeah.
But maybe we should ask our listeners, where does Superman the animated series come into play when we're talking about the chronology of Batman the animated series? Is it something that we should be looking at? Is it something that will help us? Because I know that there are other crossovers with the World's Finest and all that. I know there are crossovers between Batman and Superman that certainly take place within this universe. Is it something we should be covering? Let us know what you think, and if we should talk about Nighttime or any of these other episodes. Until next week, Drea, why don't you tell folks where they can find you online?
I'm on Twitter at Arkham Asylum Doc, on Instagram, Arkham Asylum Doc. My website is underthemaskonline.com.
You can find us both. We are at Arkham Sessions on Twitter and on Instagram. You can find us via email. It is arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028, and on Instagram, I am b_ward028. You should follow our friends over at Fanbase Press. They are at Fanbase Press on Twitter. Go check out their website to see all of their comics. Some really great ones coming up, and some convention and panel appearances for sure. Until next week, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.